Hey everyone, it's Ali. Using Room database is a common practice to persist data in an Android app. In this video, we are gonna create a simple note app which uses Room to store the note objects. To follow up with the video, basic knowledge of Android development and Kotlin is required. Everything else is covered step by step. Just follow along, and if you are blocked, feel free to write your question in the comments. The project is also available on GitHub. The link is in the description. We will also create a repository in our data layer to expose the data to the rest of the app. The repository will be a centralized place for changes to our notes. This way, we can also resolve conflicts between multiple data sources. For example, if in the future we decide to read the notes from server when the user logs in. But right now, we're just going to keep it simple. To define our dependencies without constructing them every time, we will also use Hilt dependency injection library from Google. We will also use a note view model to prepare the data for the UI, but it will be quite simple in our case. The simple UI will be made using Jetpack Compose. Alright, let's begin. So once you have Android Studio installed, go ahead and create a new project and choose empty compose activity for your project template. Go ahead and click on it and then click on next. Choose your project name and the package name. Choose where you want to save your project and which API version you want to use, and then click on finish. I'm just going to name this project as Note Room because it's a simple notes app that's using Room. Click on finish. Alright. Wait for the project to finish indexing and downloading dependencies and the first build, which usually takes a bit longer. Now that the project has finished building, we want to run to see if everything is working fine. I'm just going to create a new Android virtual machine, AVD. So I'm going to use Pixel 4 here. I'm going to use API version 32 and click next. My personal preference is to usually turn the cold boot off, so show advanced settings and click on cold boot instead of quick boot. It's just a personal preference that I like to boot my Android virtual device, from the very beginning each time I turn it on. So click on play button to turn the emulator on. Oh yeah, I just clicked twice on it. Yeah, wait for it to boot. And while that's booting, let's go and create a tiny README file. Yeah, so change the project view and on the root of the project, create a new file, call it readme.md. Just gonna call this like note room, a simple note-taking app using Room. And Jetpack Compose. Alright, let's close it and go and run the project. See if everything is running fine on the emulator. Perfect, everything looks fine. Let's go back to Android view and quickly create a new package. Let's call this one Home. And now we can create a home screen inside it. Composable home screen, and you can also add a preview to it so you can see what we are doing. Preview home screen, and simply add home screen there. So let's see the preview, and it looks empty, which is expected. Inside the home screen composable, let's start creating a scaffold. Seems like the new scaffold needs to add the opt-in annotation, so go ahead and add that so we don't see the warning. Inside the scaffold, start creating a lazy column. Inside the lazy column, let's add 3 fake items. So items, number of them, 3. Let's just say 3 text items. Alright, let's run the project, and we still don't see that. It's because we have to add this inside main activity. So add home screen inside main activity and run the project again. And there you see your list with 3 test texts. Let's also add another item for the button. We will use this button to add new text items to our list. Let's just call it add note for now. Run the project again, and there it is. Alright, let's make this button to stand in the middle of the screen. So we'll take our button, put it inside a box, and tell the button to align itself in the center of the box. And then tell the box to fill the width of the screen. This way we make sure that the button is in the middle of a box which is filling the full width of the screen, so it will be in the middle of the screen. Perfect. This list doesn't look the best, but we're just gonna leave it like this for now because our goal is to use room. Alright, let's create a new package and call it model. And we will create our room entities inside this package. Let's create a new file, call it note entity. And the entity will contain the data that we need in each text object. So each note object that will be shown in the list. So it's going to need a text attribute, which is type of a string. Then we need to tell room to use this entity as a room entity. Let's quickly have a look at the room documentation. So Android room docs. There it is. So first of all, we have to set room up by adding the dependencies. Let's go ahead and add the dependencies. So first we're going to define the version inside our project level Gradle file. Here let's add room version with the version inside documentation 242. Then we have to add room runtime and room compiler. These two should be added to the app level or the module level build.gradle file. So go ahead and add that in your dependencies. Room, persistence, library, and paste them here. It should work fine. Since we also want to test this at some point, we are also going to add the test helpers or the room testing library to our project. Let's separate these dependencies. So let's say these are the unit test dependencies here, and the rest are instrumented test dependencies or Android test. And since the room tests are also run as instrumented tests, we are pasting that dependency here. Alright, looks good. Alright, so this is what we want to do. We want to define some entities, and then we define data access objects or DAOs. and then we can use the DAOs in the rest of the app. Well, there is more to that, but we are gonna go step by step for now. So let's finish creating our entity. Go back to the node entity, add the entity annotation on top of it. We're also gonna need a primary key for our entity with the type of long. But since we also need to create instances of this entity before inserting to database, I'm going to define a default value of null for that field. I'm going to annotate it with primary key annotation and tell Room that I want this to be auto-generated. All right, looks good. Let's go back to docs with the entity, and now it's time to create our DAO. To create a DAO, we want to keep everything inside a package, so we will create a data package, and inside that we're going to create a new interface calling it node.dao, and we're going to annotate it with DAO. Let's have a look. As you can see, we can have our custom queries, or we can also use annotations from Room. So here I want to have a flow of all my node objects inside the Room. So I'm going to create a function called getAll, which returns a flow of a list of my node entities. And I'm going to write a query for it. I'm just going to tell select all from node entity. Well, node entity doesn't look very good to me, so I'm going to customize that name. It's very simple. I just have to go to my entity annotation and add table name to it. Just going to call this node. Go back to DAO and update this to node. It should autocomplete. Let's also add insert. This time we're going to use the Room annotations instead of custom query. So simply function insert with a node entity object as an input for that function. And then delete. Very similar. And we'll also have update. All right, after having the DAO, we need to create our abstract database class. So create a new file inside the data package, calling it app database. Annotated with @database. Define the entities. We only have one entity here. And also define a version for it, which is 1 in this case. Let's write the class, abstract class, app database. The type is room database. Now we also have an abstract function, which is node.dao, with the type of node.dao. So we're almost done with creating the database. Now we have to generate a room database based on these abstract and DAOs. But since this is something we have to do once in the project, we're gonna create a singleton for it. So I'm gonna create a new companion object, and I'm gonna create a new object called instance, which is nullable, and it's null by default. And then there is a new function called getInstance, which gets a context object and returns an app database. And if the instance is null, we have to create a new app database object based on our abstract using room.database builder and replace it. Let's also call the database file as node.db. And then we can also tell fallback destructive migration Well, we don't want to define our custom migration right now. That's why I added that there for now, and then build it, which looks very similar to the documentation. Because once you have migrations, you can add your custom migrations here for the future. But for now, we are fine with that. At the end of the function, we also want to return that instance. So this way we make sure that the instance is only created once, because it's a very expensive object. So now that we have the database, let's create a new package called repository. We want to create a repository to use that DAO so we can play with our objects inside the database. Let's call the file note repository, which receives a DAO object from note DAO. And for now, we only add similar 4 methods that we had before inside the DAO here. But this time we call this getAllFlow, which will simply return what this function returns. Yeah, we're going to rename the one inside the DAO because this is returning a flow object, so we will know that. It's a flow of list of note entity. And then simply return node.DAO.getAllFlow. So in the future, if we had integration with the server, we could, for example, add our server, like simply plug the inside the repository and then load the entities from server and then kinda, sync this before returning the flow object. But for now, we are only local, so we are fine with that. And then we have the insert node, which is very similar to what we have in DAO. Node entity, which is equal to node.DAO.insert with the node object from the insert. We're going to do the same for update and delete. All right, looks good. Now that we have everything, we will need a view model to make use of that repository and provide the information from the repository to the UI. Let's create a new package called viewModel, and then inside that package, let's create a new file, call it homeViewModel. And we're going to create a new interface and call it homeViewModelAbstract, just to simply create an abstract of what we want to do here. So we're going to, of course, need a node list flow with a type of flow of list of nodes. Well, node entity. Let's import the flow. And then the rest would be very similar to what we have inside the repository. So we're going to have add node method with a node entity object. I'm just going to copy and paste this one because it's similar. Update node and delete node. All right, that's our abstract. Now it's time to create a view model itself. Here at the bottom, I'm going to create a new class, call it homeViewModel, and I'm going to customize the constructor. I'm going to plug in the node repository in there, and I'm going to inherit from the abstract class, well, basically the interface that we just made, and the view model itself. I'm going to implement the methods inside the interface that we just wrote earlier, and we're going to add code to them. Well, this one is very simple, node repository, but get all flow, because that's what value needs to provide. And then add node would be again very similar, node repository that insert with the node object. And then update, which will be very similar again, and the delete. Perfect. Now we have our DAO, repository, and view model. To make them work together, we would like to use dependency injection to make this very simple. So we're going to use Hilt, which is Google's official library for dependency injection for Android. So let's go ahead and have a look at the documentation of Hilt. So Hilt, Android. So we need to add the dependencies again. So inside our project levels build.gradle, we need to add this class path dependency. So we'll go to our build.gradle in the project level. Let's close everything extra. So inside our project level build.gradle file, well, let's first define the Hilt version. And as you can see, the dependency block is not defined here, so we're going to add it, dependencies, and paste the class path dependency for Hilt here. I'm just going to write it again, so I can use my variable version. Right now we have to add this plugin IDs inside our module level build.gradle file. Now we have to add the Hilt dependency in our module dependencies. And we're going to use the variable we defined earlier for the versions. Well, we have the compile options already there. And now it's where fun starts. So first of all, we have to define our Hilt Android app. To do that, we need to create a new file called node_room app in the root of the project with the type of application. And then we're going to override the onCreate. And now we only have to annotate the class with Hilt Android app. Now once we do that, we have to also annotate our activities with Android entry point, which you have to do that with our main activity. But before that, we also have to add application class which was created inside our manifest. So we have to add that here. It's Android name with node_room app. So this application class allows Hilt to know when the application is started and initializes the dependency injection for the application. Alright, everything looks fine and the project is running fine, so that means adding Hilt dependencies has worked. Now we go and annotate our activity with Android entry point, main activity, Android entry point. So later on, we can have dependency injection inside our activity. And something else that we need to inject dependencies in is our view model that we created earlier. So we have to annotate our view model also with Hilt view model. And also we have to annotate our constructor to inject the node repository. Hilt needs to know a way to provide that repository. Because of that, we have to create a new Hilt module to tell Hilt how to provide that object. So we're going to create a new package, call it di, and create a new class and call this app module. We're going to annotate this with module and install in singleton component Now we're going to define a new singleton, which is being provided by Hilt. We're going to call the function provide note repository. So if you have a look at note repository, it will need a note DAO to be created. So this function needs a note DAO in order to create a note repository object. So we're going to add that to our function signature. Note DAO, the type of note DAO, and we're going to return a note repository, and we're going to create that using the note DAO object that we have. Oops, we have to define the return type of the function as note repository because that's what's being provided. So as you can see, we also need to provide the note DAO because Hilt also needs to know that, because if you need to provide node repository, we also need to provide note DAO to create a node repository. So we're going to create a new method called provide note DAO. Well, note DAO is something that's being generated by Room. It's an interface, so we can't make an object out of that like normal. That's something that Room is doing for us. So that's where we need this instance, which is a singleton itself. But we need to call get instance on our app database to have the database and then use the DAO inside it. And then we can return that DAO. So we are going to add app database to the signature of this method. Well, and we'll define the return type as note DAO because that's what we want to provide using Hilt. Then we're going to say return app database.note DAO. So now another question is, so app database is not being provided. So now we also have to provide the app database itself. So we're going to create a new method, provide app database. If you remember, we're going to call the get instance, which gets the context. Hilt has an access to the application context by default because it's being initiated inside the application file, the NoteRoom app class that we created earlier. So this one will be done automatically by Hilt. We're going to return app database, get instance with the app context. All right, it looks good so far. Let's quickly close these extra tabs. So now we need to access that view model inside our main activity. So we're going to create a new object, call it home view model with the type of home view model. And this will be provided by Hilt, and Hilt has this internal method called viewModels, which does that automatically. We need this view model inside the home screen, so we're going to add that to home screen signature. So add home view model. Now we'll have a bunch of errors, just tells us that's not defined. We can use the abstract method that we created earlier to create a fake home view model object inside our preview. Yes, we need also home view model abstract inside the signature of home screen, so we can use this. And then we're going to override the methods here, but since this is just for the preview, so we're going to simply add flow of a list of some fake note entities. And the rest of the methods would have empty bodies because we're not going to use them inside the preview. All right, looks good. Now that we have home view model inside the home screen, we're gonna access that node list flow object to collect it as a state so we can use it in a composable. Collect as a state. The initial value would be an empty list. Let's just call this node list state so it kind of matches the rest of the names better. And then instead of that number 3, we have to give the size of that list in the items and then use the index to access the object and then show the text attribute inside the list. Yes, we also have to add the home view model inside home screen. Alright, seems like something went wrong, but we're gonna fix that soon. Let's have a look inside our home screen. Let's clean the warning. So when the onClick is called, which is the button, the add notes button, we want to add a note. But like for now, let's just like add a fake note, like note entity with the text of fake note. We just want to make sure if it is working or not. And once the button is called, we have to see the fake note in the list. Let's clean the project. And also let's have an eye on our logcat in case something goes wrong. Alright, something went wrong. Let's see what's wrong. Seems like cannot find implementation for app database. Doesn't exist. Alright. And since we are here, let's also update Hilt version to get rid of that warning. So let's go back to the project level, build.gradle file, update the Hilt version, and sync the project. I'm going to once clean the project to make sure the auto-generated files are generated again. Seems like the problem is still persist. Seems to be the same issue. So it doesn't have anything to do with Hilt. Since we are using Kotlin Flow inside our DAO, it might be that room is not recognizing that. And for that, we have to add a new dependency to tell room how to return flows. So we're gonna need Kotlin annotation processor for this dependency, which is called capped. And then we're gonna need the KTX to support Kotlin extension functions and coroutines. Well, in this case, the flow. Oops. Let's see what's the issue this time. Seems to be a new issue, which is good. Cannot access database on the main thread. Alright, that's an easier issue to solve. If we go back to our DAO, we will see that insert, update, and delete are running on the main thread, so we need to suspend them. We're going to add the suspend to our function to make suspend functions. For flow, that's not the case because flow is using the coroutines inside, so that one doesn't need suspend. So you also have to add suspend to the insert, update, and delete inside the repository. And inside our view model, we need to launch those methods instead of suspending them again because we don't want to pass them on the UI anymore. Here we need to define a coroutine scope, private val. Let's call this IO scope because we are doing IO. Calls coroutine scope dispatchers.io. Then we're going to use that scope to launch our coroutines. Alright, now we shouldn't have that issue with main thread anymore. Let's click on add note. Looks great! So the notes are being added to the database, but it's fake notes, so we have to update that. So here in the rest of the video, we're gonna focus on adding a note, which is entered from the user's keyboard, and also updating it. So let's first update these strings here to make things look a little bit nicer. Call this scream, home button, add note. Now let's access that string here using string resource r.string. Let's quickly import r and add note. All right, let's add a new box and fill the width with it and put the note in there so we can like define height for it. 54 would be fine. Import dp and also modify the text to align it to center start of the box. And also define the max lines to be 1 line because we don't want all the text to be shown inside a list. Alright, looks a little bit better. Now let's also add some padding to the text and also make it clickable. Alright, first it's clickable. Let's add some padding now. Start 16 dp for end the same, and that should work. Yeah, it doesn't look the best, but just the minimal for now to make use of room in this project. Let's also add a tiny line so we can separate the list items. I'm going to use a simple spacer here with height of half dp and the color of gray. Yeah, it doesn't show up. I have to make it fill the width because if it doesn't have any width, we don't see anything here. So now let's also align it to bottom of the box. So each node will have text at the bottom, and also fill max width, so we will see the line. All right, it's too thick. So let's roll back to half dp. And maybe add some alpha, like 54% to the gray color. All right, looks better. Let's have a look at app inspection to see what's inside our database so far. So we see the nodes table, which is what we have, and we see like fake nodes in it. And when we add nodes, we activate the live update, you will see that one node gets added there. Yes, so everything is working fine so far. Let's close the inspection and make sure to stop it. Alright, now let's go back to our UI package in home and create a new Kotlin file. Call it node popup. We want to create a quick and simple pop-up to allow the user enter some text to be saved as a note. Composable node pop-up, and we're going to define some methods here. Let's say what happens on click save. So this pop-up will have a save button and a dismiss button, and when the user clicks on save, we want this onClick method to be called, well, as a lambda. And also when it's dismissed, we want to call onDismiss. Let's also say when onClick save is called, there will also be a string provided in the lambda. We can also reuse this lambda for editing the text, which is currently there. So we can add a new variable to our signature. Let's call it text. And this variable would contain the current text if the user clicks on one of the texts and tries to edit it. So now let's create a new compose dialog. And when onDismiss request event is called, then call onClick dismiss. So simply forward this call to another one. And let's create a new column. Very simple. And we're gonna modify this column to have a rounded corner shape. Let's say the radius would be 8 dp. Import dp. And also set the background to default background of the compose theme. Now let's add a basic text field. And this way we can allow the user to add their text and type it. Here we can quickly have a look at the basic text field documentation. And as you can see, there is a value and onValue change, which is called when the user types the text. So we simply have to define a mutable state to support that. Let's define our state first. Let's call it text state. Remember savable, so it kind of survives during the orientation change and other config changes. Then basic text field, give that value, text state.value, and then value change. Simply have to tell that the value of text state equals to it, which is the string coming from the lambda. At the bottom, let's add a new row for the buttons. And here we can simply define simple compose buttons, one of them for the dismiss and one of them for save. Let's say this one is dismiss, copy it, paste it, and call the other one as save. Let's make this a bit nicer by adding the text inside the strings resource. Alright, let's use those resources here. Import R, screen home button, dismiss, and button save. Alright. Now also register the onClick callbacks. So, well, this one should simply forward it to onClick dismiss, and for save, we're gonna call onClick save. I also would need a string which would be the text state value. Oops. Oh, we can't have name arguments inside the lambda signature, so let's remove that. All right, it looks good. Let's also add some spacer between the boxes, between the buttons. Let's add a modifier to the raw, so there is some space between the pop-up and the buttons. When the user clicks on a node, then it will show the node pop-up. Let's ignore the callbacks for now. And let's define a new state for the pop-up. Again, remember savable. The mutable state of a boolean, like default false. So when it's true, we can open the pop-up. And in our onClick, we can update the state of the pop-up. Well, it would be much cleaner if we simply create a enum class, let's say pop-up state, and then there define two states for now, open and close. We're gonna also add a third state for edit. Now instead of mutable state of false, we just have to say pop-up state.closed as the default state. And when the user clicks, we have to set the value to pop-up state.open. Now at the bottom of the scaffold, we have to use that state to know if the pop-up should be opened or not. So we're going to use a when statement to look at the value of the pop-up state, and if it's open, we're going to show the pop-up, and if it's closed, there's nothing there. And when onClickDismiss event is called, we're going to set the state to close so the pop disappears. And now on save event, we're going to use the add node method of the view model to add the node object to the database. So let's run the code and see what's happening. Oops. It actually looks like it's working. It just, the text field doesn't have any padding, so it looks very narrow. So let's add that padding. So we're going to define a modifier, dot padding, start 16 and 16 and top 24. Let's run it again and see. Alright, it looks a little bit better. Again, this is not the best design. This is only for testing room. So that's why we are not spending any time on the design of this project. Seems like clicking on save is not closing our pop-up. So we can also add that logic to our code. Let's go back to our onClick save callback. And there we can also update the value of pop-up after saving it to viewModel to close. So this way we can close the pop-up once it's saved. Alright, the next step would be to update the node, which is already added to the database. So we want to allow the user to click on a node and see the node inside the pop-up and be able to change it. And once they click on save, the same node has to be updated. As you remember, we added this text value inside our pop-up which would support that feature. So now we will add a new state for the pop-up. And whenever the item is clicked, we will set the pop-up state to the new edit state we just made. And at the bottom, inside our condition, we will also add this edit to our when. And whenever the edit is the state, we will open the pop-up with the current text that was clicked on. I'm just gonna write text to edit inside it to test this. So as you can see, the edit pop-up state is working fine, and we are able to open the pop-up with this new state. We only have to show the right text inside it. For that, we can use the text state object that we have. So whenever the user clicks on a note object on the list, the text state value will be updated with the text of that note. And this way we can see the note text inside the pop-up whenever the user clicks on the note. Now we also have to update the object when the user clicks on save in edit state. So whenever the user clicks on save, I want to create a note entity, but I also have to provide the room ID, but I don't have that here. So I can also provide a note state ID at the top to save the ID of the note, and the type would be long. Whenever it's clicked, I also have to set the value of the note ID state to the value of the note ID. Let's say instead of having 0 long, let's define this as nullable. Let's call this null, but we don't want the type of any, so we have to explicitly define the type of note ID state as a mutable state of long. Now we come here at the bottom and make sure that everything is correct here. So we have note ID state.value set at the room ID. So this should work fine now. Update note should be able to recognize the note inside the room and recognize that's already there and update it instead of adding a new note. All right, let's click on save, and it's working. So we can choose each of the nodes in the list and change its value and update it. That's perfect so far. Now the last part would be to delete a node. We're gonna keep this very simple. We're gonna say whenever the user long presses one of the note items, we want to delete that note. So we'll have a very similar logic to the click notes that we had, because we will need the room ID. So we're gonna listen for pointer input callback, and then we have to detect the tap gestures. And when the user long presses, we will delete the note. Then we can simply use the view model to delete that note. All right, we run the project and long click, delete, long click, delete. You can simply long click and delete all of these fake notes. Everything else is also working fine. Let's just get rid of those fake notes. Let's test adding a new note. All right, everything is working as expected. Let's get rid of the rest of the fake notes. Let's add another note. All right, it's added. All right, that was it. I hope this video could help you add room to your project and use it with dependency injection by Hilt and Kotlin flows. All right, well done following up so far. Make sure to give yourself a pat on the back. The code for this project is available on GitHub. You can find the link inside the video description. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to ask it in the comments. I usually try to answer as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any feedbacks, please go ahead and leave a feedback in the comment section. And if you liked the video, make sure to click on like and subscribe button. That was it. Hope to see you next time. Bye.